Thank you all so much for joining us for Dabbling in the Data with Milk Crate and Public Profit. Corey and I are very excited to be doing this first collaboration together. This is not the first time that we've talked about this work, but it's definitely the first time that we've shared it publicly. So we're really excited to be doing this together. We're going to just go over some quick event logistics. I think I just heard somebody else join, so I'm going to quickly... Nope, I think we're good. Okay. So we're going to go over some logistics. The very first thing, which we've already covered before, is that there is a guide and a handout from links in the chat box, so you can access those there. We're going to use the chat box to communicate with each other, so if you have questions at the end, please put them in there, or if you have questions during, you can post them while we're going, but we're going to address them at the end. And again, we are recording the audio and video from today for future use and distribution, so please just be aware of that fact. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to do a quick introduction for the two presenters, myself and Corey. We're going to give you all a chance to introduce yourselves, so we'd love it if you could just in the chat right now, you can start posting your name, your organization, what city you're calling from, and if you'd like to share your contact information, feel free to do it there. Otherwise, we will not be sharing contact information with the attendees just to protect your privacy. So if you want to be able to have people reach out to you, you can post that information in the chat. I'm going to be doing a 15-minute presentation on nonprofit and foundation funding and the equation and relationship between the two and some of the challenges that currently exist in this sector. And then I'm going to touch on briefly the nonprofit program life cycle and some Milk Crate case studies and talk a little bit about a webinar we're doing next week that takes a deeper dive onto that so that anyone who's interested can sign up for next week's webinar to get more of that specific information. And then the real bulk of the presentation is going to be Corey's presentation, the hands-on data analysis, the 3 steps to success, scan, assess, and prioritize, and then the 15-minute Q&A at the end. Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Excuse me. Okay, so my name is Morgan Berman. I am the founder and CEO of Milk Crate. I'm also very involved in the Philadelphia nonprofit sector. I am the president of my civic association. I'm also on the board of directors for Philly Startup Leaders, Alma Links Philadelphia, and the Energy Coordinating Agency. I'm a former Planned Parenthood employee and several other nonprofits where I worked in various roles before starting Milk Crate 6 years ago. And for fun and stress relief, I also practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and recently got my 3rd stripe on my blue belt. So if there are any martial arts nerds out there, let's connect about that later. My email is morgan@milkrate.tech if you'd like to get in touch. Feel free to tweet at me or about this presentation. My Twitter is @MorganBerman. Corey?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Corey Newhouse, the founder and principal of Public Profit. We are an evaluation and strategy consultancy that helps mission-driven organizations use data to be their very best. I'm an unabashed data nerd and former educator. I love data and love helping my colleagues in the field to find their own love of data. My civic involvement includes board membership in a group called Help a Mother Out, which distributes free diapers to families throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. Public benefits do not cover diapers, so they often are a big financial burden for families around the country. For stress release and fun, I do half marathons very, very slowly, very slowly. No danger of winning anytime soon. Please feel free to be in touch with me. My email is corey@publicprofit.net. We're on Twitter @public_profit.
Thank you, Corey. So I'm going to just give you a quick overview of Milk Crate and kind of take that first 15 minutes to talk a bit about kind of laying the groundwork for what Corey's going to talk about afterwards. So Milk Crate is a company that takes offline nonprofit programs online. We are a platform that produces white-labeled apps for nonprofit organizations to grow their program's impact and to prove it to funders. You can see in this slide we have an image of an iPhone with an app on it and then a computer with an administrative dashboard. That app is tied to that dashboard so that when users, your volunteers or program participants are completing challenges, earning points, progressing in the program, engaging and communicating, all of those moments turn into digitally tracked data points in an admin dashboard, organized by user and group and able to be visually represented in all kinds of wonderful ways that Corey will be talking about later. Now, when I said we were going to talk a bit about foundations and nonprofits, and the reason, the first thing that I want to talk about is when foundations kind of imagine how the nonprofit world is supposed to work. The idea is that foundations are going to fund nonprofit activities. They're going to put funding in, couple it with the activities of the nonprofit, and on the other side of the equation, you're going to get some sort of demonstrated social benefit, outputs and outcomes that lead to some sort of measurable impact. That's the dream equation that foundations and nonprofits are hoping to achieve. However, there are a few really major problems, and one of them is that the foundations are spending $66 billion a year to these 1.5 million nonprofits, and there's a serious lack of transparency around grants and impact. In fact, only 16% of foundations feel like they're very successfully helping their grantees track their funding outcomes. And these foundations want to help their grantees, these nonprofits, do this work and help them do it more successfully. They just don't know how. And so the problem that we're really driven to solve is helping those foundations that represent this huge amount of investment in the nonprofit sector to use technology to engage program participants so that they can actually track, did you get the teenagers to go to the museum? Did you get the adults to vote? Did you get the senior citizens to volunteer? Whatever it is that program is trying to achieve, making it easier for those people to participate and tracking if they did so. And that's really what Milk Crate's all about, is helping track, did the program get the job done? And if not, how can we help it succeed? Just to give you a quick overview of what that looks like when a nonprofit hires Milk Crate to launch a white labeled app, there are 4 steps to kind of getting your volunteer or your program participant online and engaged in your app. The first step is downloading that app from the App Store for iOS or Android, having that user create a profile where they put in an email address, a phone number, they can enter in demographic information like race, ethnicity, gender, and then they can even join a segment or a team. Things like organizing your users by their city or their role or the grade that they're in or a cohort that they're a part of. And then they start earning points for completing challenges. And those challenges can range from signing up and checking in at an event, communicating, receiving push notifications, checking in at locations, answering polls and surveys, watching a video, reading an article, chatting, all sorts of different things that are pre-made features that nonprofits can pick and choose without having to build from scratch. It's pre-made features that allow them to design an app that engages their program participants or volunteers in the way that is most well suited to that program. And that's a really unique thing in the context of nonprofit tech, when most of what's happening is around fundraising, right? It's Giving Tuesday. Everyone's out there trying to bring in money, but what do you do once you get that money in the door? How do you actually help your program succeed? And that's when tools like Efforts to Outcome, Wild Apricot, they can be helpful when you have a case manager, but when you want to put something in the hands of your program participants so that they can do the work for you of checking in at the location, answering the poll question, reading the article, and commenting on their experience, those are things that are much more efficient when put in the hands of the end user, the participant, the volunteer, and then that data becomes trackable. I'm going to give you an example of one of my favorite nonprofits that Milk Crate has helped. They're called the Cultural Alliance, and the Knight Foundation funded them to create a program called STAMP. So going back to that equation that we talked about where foundations are funding nonprofits, but they don't feel like they're necessarily helping them succeed, it was very fortuitous that we actually were able to meet STAMP several years into running this program because the kids were given paper ID cards, and that card was supposed to be their passport to get into every museum in the city for free. However, every museum had a different way of checking them in. And so the STAMP program staff never knew if the kids were actually going to the museum because the data never got aggregated from all the different participating museums. And the Knight Foundation, the funder, never knew if the money that they were giving was really achieving the goal. Fast forward to the STAMP program launching an app using the Milk Crate platform. The kids now check in on their phones. It's verified through GPS that they're at that museum. And now there's real-time data showing the kids going to the museums, which days. It's organized by demographic information. This is actually an old screenshot of their admin dashboard. I don't know if you can see in the top left-hand corner where it says total users 1,870. They're now at 5,600 teenagers using the Stamp app, checking in at museums. It's an incredibly effective engagement strategy. And while it's very effective for young adults, we also have some case studies we're going to be touching on that are actually for an older adult population that have been just as successful. So again, the Stamp case study, there you can see a more recent screenshot for the total number of users. You have real tracked data showing program participants participating in the program in verified data points on an admin dashboard, and the program staff being able to get the job done in a much more effective and verified way. And obviously the foundation that funded this work is very happy about the end result as well. Oops. We're going to give one more example, and this is actually the example that Corey is going to be taking a deep dive into in terms of the data, and this is the Read by Fourth initiative. We've been working with them for a little over a year now, and they run a volunteer initiative. So different from Stamp, where Stamp was helping teens go to museums for free and tracking it with an app, the Read by Fourth initiative contains a program called Reading Captains, where adult volunteers go out into the community to educate families about how to teach their kids to be strong readers and to get them on grade reading level. There are hundreds and hundreds of volunteers participating in this program, and we're going to take a little look at a video we made so that you can get a better idea of what it looked like before and after we worked with them.
Directed by the Free Library of Philadelphia, Read by Fourth is a citywide campaign that connects volunteers, families, and the community to a shared vision of ensuring that all children will be reading at grade level by the time they enter the 4th grade. Unfortunately, in the city of Philadelphia, almost 2/3 of the children entering the 4th grade are unable to read at grade level, but have no fear, the Reading Captains are to the rescue. Milk Crate is proud to team up with the Free Library to launch Read by Fourth's very own Reading Captain app. The Reading Captains are now here with their app to help Philadelphia's children grow into strong readers, so that each and every child has the opportunity to be exceptional learners and help parents be more informed about the literacy resources available throughout the city. Through the app, captains are able to learn about Read by Fourth's programs, services, and volunteer opportunities, register for events and workshops, share and connect parents to upcoming reading workshops, report and track volunteer hours, and recruit more reading captains. Administrators are also able to track specific activities, challenges, and actions that Reading Captains encourage parents and kids to take. For example, going to community meetings, going to Reading Captain meetings, or sharing info on social media. The Read by Fourth app will be the central hub for Reading Captains as they connect with families across the city, and has information for families to help their young readers elevate their reading level, as well as tools for Reading Captains and parents to stay engaged with the initiative.
If you have a program or organization that needs to engage an audience, visit our website and book a free demo to learn how your Milk Crate app could help you reach your mission.
All right, so again, Corey's going to take a deep dive into the data from that program in just a moment, but I wanted to give a shout out to the tool we used to actually make that video. It's an incredibly effective and affordable tool that most nonprofits don't know they can utilize. It's a way to make animated videos without having an animator. It's called Beyond, and it's something that we at Milk Crate have been using for years now to make free animated videos covering each of the nonprofits that we've built an app for. We actually have a YouTube page where we list all of them, and we think it's been an incredibly effective tool for us to promote the work that we're doing, and an incredibly effective tool for our clients, the nonprofits that we build apps for, to promote their programs as well. And this actually leads me to the webinar that we're going to be doing next week, the Nonprofit Program Life Cycle, which includes enlist, engage, evaluate, and finally endorse. And these 4 phases are the kind of framework of the webinar that we're going to be doing next week. And Beyond, the animated video making tool that we just showed you, is a wonderful example of how you can enlist people. A tool you can use to capture people's attention and get them interested in participating in your program, either as a member, a donor, a volunteer, many things that can be used to enlist new participation. And so next week, and this is also the framework, the kind of workshop worksheet that we're going to be looking at during that webinar, where we're going to show you the current tools that you might be using, what could be better, and then go over new tools like Beyond, as well as Milk Crate and many others that could be used to help support your nonprofit program in these 4 phases. Now, again, we don't have time to go into all of that today, so next week on Tuesday, December 10th, we have an hour-long session where we're going to go over the 4 steps of nonprofit program lifecycle: enlist, engage, evaluate, and endorse. And so I'm going to actually just right now, while we're all thinking about it, I'm going to paste the link into the chat window, and then that will be my transition. So that is the link to sign up for this free webinar next week, where I will be spending an hour with all of you going over those 4 phases for nonprofit program lifecycle, tools to help you better succeed and eventually get the data that you're looking for. Now I'm going to turn it over to Corey, and I'm going to go back into presentation mode and let her take over from here. Thank you, Corey.
Great. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Yeah.
And again, thanks everybody for joining us. We've got such a great group with us today from such a wide variety of organizations and all parts of the country. So really happy to be with you here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our approaches to meaningfully engaging teams with data. More and more we find that data is easier and easier to come by. Not easy, but easier to come by. And yet so many teams in mission-driven organizations really find themselves scratching their heads when it comes time to interpreting, analyzing, and making sense of and taking action on the data that we have. So our Dabbling in the Data Guide is our offering to teams in the mission-driven space that are interested in not just collecting data, but actually analyzing it, understanding it, using it to inform practice. Now, one of the things to know is that while Milk Crate is cutting edge technology, making use of the fact we've all got smartphones right next to us, Dabbling in the Data is distinctly analog, if you will. Lots of Post-it notes involved, and that's on purpose. As you'll see, a lot of our approach with Dabbling is really finding participatory ways for all members of a team to engage with data, to engage in the meaning-making process, and we find that literally rolling up one's sleeves and working with the data in hands-on ways makes a big difference. So we'll talk a little bit about why hands-on data analysis in the first place. I want to share with you our 3 steps to success, the scan, assess, and prioritize framework. We're going to use some examples from a Milk Crate report to show you ways in which teams can use the data and the reports that they have access to take that next step around making meaning. And then we'll discuss. As Morgan mentioned, we've got plenty of time for Q&A today. So as many of us have experienced, data analysis sessions can often feel pretty terrible. We might have the things that we need, our proverbial backpack and brown bag lunch, but the emotional sense, the interactive sense that people have when it comes time to look at data is far less than ideal. I'd love to hear from you using the chat box why that might be. Why do organizations, mission-driven organizations, really struggle to keep their upbeat, excited mindsets when it comes time to look at the data? While we're holding to get some input from you all through the chat box, some of our observations about why data analysis sessions feel less than engaging, less than happy, stems from the fact that a lot of our colleagues in the mission-driven space don't necessarily feel super comfortable with numbers. And so the idea of looking at numbers, especially in a group, is not exciting for them. I think also there can be a lot of misconceptions about the consequences of looking at data. Can really trigger people's concerns about their own personal performance as professionals, rather than thinking of the data as reflections on the team or on the organization. And then also, as simple as it sounds, that we think that a lot of folks in mission-driven spaces really just haven't had any good experiences yet when it comes to looking at data, And so it can be hard to get psyched up and excited to look at data if it's always been terrible every time before. Oh, and thank you, Derek. Derek mentioned that typically data sets have their limitations, and so they don't necessarily answer every question that everyone might have, and it can be really difficult to involve all stakeholders. And that is definitely, Derek, one of the challenges that we sought to address in creating the Dabbling in the Data activities. On the next slide, we've got a quick preview of what is in the guide. And again, you can download it for free from our website. We have 15 different activities that are organized based on their primary use, whether looking at distribution of data, change over time, contribution, looking at categories, or communicating findings. The activities can be used on their own to engage teams in a particular question or the particular part of data, or you can organize them into series of activities, and that's part of what we'll be sharing today. So on the next page, we've got our 3 steps to success. This is the scan, analyze, prioritize sequence. And on the next slide, we've got just some fun images, hopefully to help get those in your mind. And this is also linked to the handout that we have available for download as well. The guide and the handout work together. And the reason why we suggest this process when it comes to making meaning of data with a group is that it can walk the team through each step of getting to know the data. What is high, what is low, what is big, what is small, what is what we expected, what is not what we expected. That's the scan phase. In the analyze phase, we have some different activities to offer in which the team can dig a little bit deeper into understanding the root causes of the patterns that they see. And we think that that's really important because the analyze phase can help turn the conversation from what can sometimes be fairly surface understandings or kind of the pat narrative. Parents don't care, parents don't have enough time, no one's interested, kinds of quick explanations that might come to mind first, but that doesn't necessarily help get you to action. And so the analyze phase are activities that you and your team can do to really try to understand those root causes of what's driving the patterns that you found in the scan phase. And then in prioritize, we have some exercises that your team can use to decide among the different action options that they have. So in the analyze phase, we got clear about what might be driving the patterns that we see. And in prioritize, we can decide among different options to take action. So I'm going to share 3 spotlight activities on the next slide, aligned with each of those different processes, the different phases: scan, analyze, prioritize. There are a variety of other activities in the guide and indeed out in the world that you can use for each of these phases. We wanted to give you a quick preview of these 3. So for scan, we're going to share with you a very simple activity called high-low. I have some daydreams of getting onto Price is Right with high-low. I probably never will, but it's okay. We'll also share then the yarn slope graph for the analyze phase. And then one of my very favorite prioritization techniques, the magic quadrant. So first, let's look at the scan phase and for high-low. So on our next slide, we have an example of the 6 teams from the Philly Reading Captains from Ready for 4. And so each of those teams, as Morgan mentioned, is amassing points for different activities that the teams were doing in order to engage more parents, to engage more readers. And so what I'm going to do is to ask you to make some guesses about the total points that these reading captains earned in each of their areas. I know you have 0 context for this. In real life, you'll have some more context. What I want to, some hints that I want to give you is that the point totals are listed in order here. The highest is 1,299. The lowest is 36. We've got 6 teams overall. So I would love to see in the chat box if you all can just make some predictions about how many points these different areas have knowing that the highest is 1,299 and the lowest is 36. And the reason that I'm asking you to do this, and that I would encourage you to do this in the scan phase of your own program's work, is that making predictions is a really great way for your teams to activate the existing knowledge that they have, to focus their attention, and to start making some hypotheses about the data before they even see it. Of course, in this situation, it's a little funny because I'm assuming very few of you are reading captains in Philadelphia with knowledge of your point total. But this idea of let's make some predictions, let's get a sense of what we think the data will look like is a really important process for your team to make a little bit of meaning with their data to start engaging. How many, let's try another way. How many of the 6 teams do you think have more than 750 points? And again, our high is 1,299, the Northwest team, and our low is 36. Two, thank you. 3, great. Got some optimists in the room, I like it. So we're going to show you on the screen how to do high-low. In this case, and it is as easy as it sounds, you've got a piece of chart paper, line in the middle, and on the next slide we've got the starter of that. And where the line is going to be the average number, in this case, of points by reading captain. It could be the average percent of people agreeing to your survey question, the average rating, whatever it might be. So on the next slide, you'll see the starter of our high-low. So as a facilitator, you're going to have a piece of chart paper, line, and the average number. In this case, that is 495 points. And then different members of your team are going to have Post-it notes with the actual points by region. And you're going to invite folks to come up to the chart paper and put their number either above the line or below the line. That's the high-low, roughly in order. It's not essential that it be perfectly aligned, but the idea is that, again, we're scanning, we're getting a sense of what is large, what is small, what is high, what is low. So on the next slide, you'll see the actual point totals by area. There's our Northwest up there at the top, South, and then the other regions, the other areas of Philly that had fewer than 495 points. What are some things that you observe seeing this and imagining a big piece of chart paper with Post-it notes around? So one thing that I noticed is certainly that two of the areas have quite large numbers of point totals, and a few of the areas have fairly low numbers of point totals, and then there's some folks in the middle. And that one of the reasons that we encourage you to do this activity sort of as a slow reveal where each person has a part is really to give folks the time and opportunity to be making hypotheses, checking that, looking at the data, getting curious, staying curious. And that as with this activity, as with many in the scan phase, the math itself, the analysis itself is quite simple, but your goal is really to get the team engaged with looking at the numbers and get them ready to think about what some of their next steps might be. On the next slide, you'll see for a nice small data set like this, it's also fairly easy just to look at a table. Again, the goal for you is not just to have folks look at the data and know what it says, but really to get engaged with it and start to feel comfortable with it, which is, we think, one of the reasons to do an activity like high-low. Another option on the next slide is to use a map. And this is a map from the Milk Crate app. that shows the same information, but geographically. And would love to hear in the chat box thoughts that you all have when this came up, when this map came up. What are some of the observations that you were able to make right away looking at this representation of the data? One of the reasons we wanted to share this with you is just appreciating that humans are natural pattern finders. We are really good at taking in a lot of visual information really quickly. And so a raster map like this, in which there's both using shapes and color and geography, can also help people get a lot of information really quickly. And so in your scan phase, if you have geographic data like this, using a map like this is another great way to start engaging teams, start making meaning of the data. Thank you, Sky. So, and Sky mentions that one of their observations is that there are a lot of neighborhoods that are in the lower point region, particularly in that northeast quadrant. And you can see that both through the color coding as well as some of the numbers in those different regions. And again, as we saw with the other parts of our scan, a couple of neighborhoods are really pulling up the average, really generating a lot of point totals, while the others are tend to be clustered in the lower range. So that's a quick preview of the scan phase. Again, your goal in this is to help your team start getting familiar with the data that you have, start generating some hypotheses, getting curious about what they're seeing, and starting to develop some interest in better understanding what's behind some of the different patterns that we see. And so we're going to move on to the next slide into our analyze phase. And again, this is an opportunity for you to engage your team in a little bit of a deeper dive about what might be driving the patterns that you see. And so the activity that we want to share with you is called Yarn Slope Graph. Since we're online, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination a little bit. When we do a yarn slope graph, we have literally pieces of foam board, some push pins, and some yarn, in which we are creating a line chart of some data that's changing over time. Why yarn, do you ask? Quite frankly, because people like office supplies. They like making crafts. And the tactile nature of actually plotting out the data using yarn is another great way to get folks engaged, keep them engaged, and lower a little bit of the tension or nervousness that they might be feeling. Now, of course, I'm mindful that not every organization is in love with crafts, and some folks might think that that's a little hokey. Feel free to use just a regular old line graph for this activity, but we like to use yarn. Again, it makes things a little more interactive, a little more fun. So on the next slide, you'll see another look at the data from Milk Crate. This is a line chart that is showing the total number of points by neighborhood over time. So you can see this particular campaign ran from March through the end of July, and you can see the different colors with the lines moving up. So again, with Yarn Slope Graph, we would mock this out using yarn. You can just use a color print if you'd like. And so the main idea of this activity is to leverage the team's knowledge of what is going on behind these patterns that is helping to explain what we see. And so in this case, you would invite the group to take a look at these patterns and invite them to share their insights about what is actually driving these particular patterns. I'm going to focus our attention on the Northwest Philly and the South Philly, the dark green and light green lines, those two groups that are up near the top. And so in this made-up example, we've got those reading captains, asked them for their input about what is driving these patterns, what was both driving the numbers that they were getting in terms of the numbers of points, as well as the patterns that we see. And on the next slide, we've got a mock-up of what that might look like when folks share their handy-dandy Post-its and note what they experienced when it came to this campaign. And so you'll see for the dark green, for our Northwest Philly reading captains, they had a booth at 2 different community events in which they were contacting with new volunteers, distributing books, getting folks involved with the campaign. And so that explains the sort of stepped nature of their points totals. They got most of their totals through those 2 community events. The lighter green, the South Philly group, they had a partnership with a local after-school program that served kids and families in the community. And so they were a really steady part of the out-of-school time programs. Again, helping to distribute books, get parents involved, and really that slow build of the points over time. I'll acknowledge these are totally made up examples that I cooked up in my own brain, just to show some ways that really engaging your team in looking at how this data is changing over time and offering some input about their experiences, what they saw that was driving these, to help them make some meaning, and help the group better understand how they're getting to the patterns in the data that they are. And again, this is admittedly a pretty low-tech process, but a really fantastic way to blend that quantitative and qualitative information. Derek mentioned earlier that data sets tend to have limitations, and using some of these activities like a yarn slope graph is a great way to start getting more information over and above that quantitative data that you may not otherwise have access to, and a great way to engage lots of folks who have some involvement in your project in contributing that information, contributing to that knowledge base. And so on the next slide, we're gonna move on to our prioritize process, and wanted to acknowledge that sort of as part of these 3-step process: scan, analyze, and prioritize. In between the analyze and prioritize, you all are starting to come up with some ideas about what next steps might make sense. The analysis process is meant to get clearer about what some of those root causes or what some of those drivers might be. And then in prioritize is when you can make some decisions among the options that you have available to you. And so I'm super excited to share with you Magic Quadrant. This is one of my very favorite prioritization methods. So on the next slide, you'll see how a Magic Quadrant is set up. This is borrowed from the for-profit business world, in which different practices or products are measured based on the investment that is made relative to the revenue that they generate. We've changed it up a little bit and used it to apply to mission-driven spaces. And what you'll see here is that we are going to be looking at different alternative actions based on the level of effort that they require, low to high, relative to the amount of impact or benefit that we anticipate they will have, low to high. And so what you'll see here is that things that have high effort but low anticipated impact or benefit, that bottom right corner, we're going to say no thank you, not worth doing it. Things that have high impact and low effort, that top left quadrant, those are our stars. Those are the things that we definitely want to do. Those are our easy wins, our high return on investment actions. The other 2 quadrants, high impact, high effort, low impact, low effort, those for me are usually question marks. Lots of our clients, when we do this activity, either prospectively or even retrospectively, there are things that take a lot of time and a lot of effort that have a lot of benefit and are totally worth it. And one of the conversations that we like to have with them is how might we reduce the level of effort while maintaining the level of benefit over time. But all that to say, the Magic Quadrant is a great way, after your team has generated some possible options to pursue, this is a great way to prioritize which options are most likely to be worth the effort required to implement them. And so on the next slide, you'll see that we have a sample for us to practice with, in which we've set a goal based on our scan and analyze process. that we want all of our neighborhood teams to earn at least 495 points in the next campaign. So that's that average number of points that the areas earned in the last campaign. And we've come together and set a goal that all of our groups will be at least at that level. And so we've done some brainstorming about some potential solutions for this. One thought was to really offer some enhanced training on Milk Crate for all of our neighborhood captains to make sure that they're all using the app, all able to demonstrate their efforts and the points that they've earned. We've also thought about some monthly coaching calls for those captains with Read by Fourth so that they can get some help in troubleshooting, figuring things out, doing some planning. And then another thought that we've had is to form some more formal partnerships with Philly's neighborhood associations, recognizing that one of those teams had really great success in having a booth at local community fairs. And so I've got a little mock-up here of a Magic Quadrant, very high tech, as you can see. And those are indeed scribbles on my tiny little Post-it notes. What I would like to hear from you all is where you think we should put each of these 4 ideas. I intentionally try to make some of the ideas better than others relative to the amount of work that it requires and relative to the amount of benefit, so that you can see what it looks like to map these out. So for our first option, the enhanced Milk Crate training for neighborhood captains. Again, remember our goal is that we want to get all of the teams up to 495 points or more in our next campaign. What quadrant should we put this one in? Is this a high effort, low impact, low effort, high impact? Use the chat box. Let me know, where do you think we should put this Post-it on our chart? Oh, you guys are feeling shy today. Okay, Sky suggests high impact, high effort. So we would just put that there. Now, in real life, of course, there's going to be some differences of opinion about where different activities might go, and that is a really key part of this conversation. We found it's really helpful with teams to, in some cases, certain ideas, everybody's going to agree right where they go, easy peasy. Other cases, folks might have a difference of opinion about how much effort it might take, how much benefit it might have, and that's a fantastic opportunity for you as a facilitator to try to unpack a little bit of what might we do to make this a lower level of effort and a higher level of benefit. How about those monthly coaching calls for the captains with Read by Fourth? What are your thoughts? And again, the idea behind this was that we would have regularly standing calls with Read by Fourth for coaches to get help with their any challenges that they're having, any opportunities that they might. Okay, great. So we've got a nomination for high impact, low effort. So that goes in our star quadrant. Fantastic. And then how about this last option around partnerships with Philly's neighborhood associations? Again, building off of the lessons learned from the team that really got big point totals from hosting at community events. I'll hop in here and say that, oh, thank you, Derek. We agree. I think that is another high impact, high effort, especially to start. These are both examples of things that might eventually make their way over to our stars, of being a little bit lower effort, but still having that high impact once we get things up and running and are able to replicate. And so again, that's a great example of a conversation you want to have with this team about how to make the effort relative to the likely impact that much higher. One big piece of advice that I want to offer you when using Magic Quadrant to prioritize is to do the brainstorming first, then share the Magic Quadrant activity. I have learned from experience when you show the Magic Quadrant and then ask people to brainstorm, they're going to give you a lot of things at the top quadrant, which is great. but sort of misses out on the opportunity to be really rigorous in thinking about what is the whole scope of ideas we might have or options we might take. So little pro tip from me to you. And so on the next slide, we've got just an invitation for you to think a little bit based on today's session, kind of any activities that you like the best, or any thoughts that you have about how you might use some of these approaches in your own organization. You can go ahead and use the chat box. Again, any immediate thoughts? One of our main pieces of advice for folks as they start to use these activities is to start with a fairly straightforward piece of information, especially if your team is not particularly used to working together in these ways and looking at data. Again, this can be a really emotionally charged and intellectually challenging process. So you probably don't want to bring your hairiest, most confusing, most difficult to work with data to the team first. Maybe there's a regular dashboard that you all are using, a regular report that your team looks at, that you could change pace a little bit, use some of these more participatory methods to engage your team in a different way with something that is familiar to them as you all are building up your routines and your mental muscles and your repository of different size Post-its to do this work together. Great. Sky likes the high-low, really to put that data into perspective, and I'm so glad you did. I think that, again, it's one of those that's super simple on its face, but can help teams to really, again, get that mind's eye view of the distribution of their data in ways that tables can't always do. And Magic Quadrant, Caleb, I'm glad you like it. It's one of my favorites too. Again, a great way to decide among different options and to depersonalize some of those decisions as well. It's not about me liking Morgan's idea or me liking Sky's idea. It's about us as a team thinking about the options that are available to us. And with that, I think we've got some time for Q&A, and I know we've got our contact information to share with you as well, so you can be sure to stay in touch with us. But would love to answer any questions that you might have or lend a hand with any challenges you might be facing.
I'm going to pop over to the chat window so I can see what's happening there. Thank you so much, Corey. Caleb, thank you for the ideas. I enjoyed the Magic Quadrant activity. Yeah. I also love the name of that one. I wish more things in our work lives had the word magic in them.
Indeed, indeed. I can't take credit. It was I had learned it. I'd learned about Magic Quadrant actually from a nonprofit finance book. They were using it to think about the return on investment of different possible programs or grants.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I think it's something that I want to incorporate into a lot of different things that we're doing with our customers as well, helping them kind of process this data in the way that we did for Read by Fourth, and then how you helped kind of continue it afterwards once the report was made. Let's see, numerous counties, yeah, high impact. Yeah, a lot of people like the high impact. Yeah, sorry, we're going to ask the same question. Any questions? There are 13 of you still in here. You wouldn't be hanging out if you didn't have something you wanted to hear talk about. Is anyone running a program that feels similar to any of the case studies that we talked about, the STAMP program or the Read by Fourth program, where you're trying to get participants or volunteers to do activities, to communicate, and to do it out in a kind of maybe geographical area or over a long period of time, and you're trying to like figure out how to communicate and engage them? Does that resonate with anybody else on the call? And if so, feel free to post the name of your program, because we'd love to kind of dig into those examples. While you're all thinking about whether or not you're going to post into the chat, just a reminder, because we only have 5 minutes left on the call, and we want to be respectful of your time. We're going to send out a follow-up email with our contact information and an opportunity to kind of set up a one-on-one conversation if anyone is working in a space where the materials that we covered was a nice opener, but you have more questions or you want to take a deeper dive specifically on your nonprofit or your program. We'd be happy to set up like a 20-minute phone call where we can have a conversation either from the Milk Crate perspective or the public profit perspective or both. So just keep an eye out for those emails. Reminder that we do have that webinar next week where we're going to take a deep dive into, there's about 7 tools that we're going to cover and some kind of interactive worksheets that you're going to do for your own program. So kind of the way that we took a look at Read by Fourths data, we're going to actually kind of let you do the work for your own program. So please, that link again is in the chat hangout, and we'll include that in the follow-up. But there's still plenty of room in that webinar for you guys to sign up, and to also please share it with anybody else in your kind of nonprofit professional network that you think would benefit from what we're talking about. We'd love to be able to share that material with them as well. Yeah, so that's just a note about what we're going to be following up with. And again, if in the meanwhile, before we send out that, you want to get in touch with us or have our contact info, it's right here on this slide, but we will be sending all of that out.
I'll use the chat box to share if anybody is really excited about this idea of more participatory approaches to looking at data. A few of our favorite resources, in addition to dabbling in the data, of course, are game storming and visual teams. And so I will put those in the chat just so that you've got those easily available online. But those are some of our favorite resources that you can use to engage teams at looking at data, making plans, coming together to really make meaning and understand information together, which I think can be so challenging for us. So again, I'll put those in the chat in case you want to check out some of those other resources.
Great. Okay, last call for questions. Okay, seems like everyone was fully informed by the webinar. It doesn't have any questions right now, but again, we'll send out that email connecting with all of you and giving you a chance to have a one-on-one conversation and answering any questions or anything that you might want to talk about afterwards. Okay.
Thanks everyone so much for joining us. Have a terrific day.
Bye. Thanks, Kai.